going to continue with the presentations. We are designing the vocational education and training of the future, and now I would like to invite somebody who is promoting a conspiracy in education. He proposes to wake the Diplodocus up. Let's welcome the writer, philosopher José Antonio Marina, who is the director of the Parents University.
Look at us.
No. En primer lugar, gracias por la invitación, porque a mí me gusta hablar de educación. Me parece que es una experiencia.
Thank you very much for having invited me to be here. I'm going to be sharing with you my experience, a constructive experience. I agree with Jorge Arevalo when he says that we need to be optimistic. There was a graffiti once on a wall saying, "Let's leave pessimism for better times." When we are in a difficult situation, that is exactly when we, especially we as teachers, we need to remember that we have optimism within our DNA. And also I am delighted to be here among vocational education and training teachers. When I wrote the book, the white book, about teaching, I wrote it with my team, I insisted to say that maybe teachers are the ones who have more challenges ahead of themselves because the field of implementation and the different matters with which they are working are evolving very quickly. And that means that if all the teachers need to be training themselves all the time, we need lifelong learning. When we talk about vocational education and training, that is even more important. Right now, we are coming into a new period of education, a new era of education. The Global Forum for New Education says that maybe in this period, schools are going to be undergoing the biggest changes that have ever taken place. And why is it so? Well, because we don't know very well what we should be teaching. Everybody says that we have come not into the society of knowledge, but the society of learning, the learning society. There is a book, the name of which is The Era of Learning, how to have and create this era or learning society. Why is it so? Because there is a law that all teachers, all politicians, and all citizens should know about, which is Ribam's law, which says anybody, all people or companies, all societies, in order to survive and to thrive, we all need to learn at least at the same speed as the environment is changing. In the past, when the environment was changing very slowly, maybe one period of training was enough. But when we are in changing environments, when they change quicker and quicker, if we do not update our learning, if we are not able to keep on learning, we are going to be in trouble. And that is something that we need to remember, because when we think about our students, we are there to help them. I come from the education field. I am a professor. I have been working in secondary education, and I have not been teaching university. I think that in university they have abandoned their teaching vocation. Where I like to be is in the classroom together with our young people, side by side with them, just as many of you. And we need to prepare our students, our young people, for the new world, for the VUCA world. What is the VUCA world? That implies variability. Yes, because we are in a changing world. All the things are going to remain, we need to evolve and innovate, because things are changing very, very quickly. And then U implies uncertainty. This is a highly uncertain world. As you know, the more information we have, the bigger uncertainty gets. Now, more and more, we get information, we get loads of information. Students look at their mobile phones 400 times per year, and all those information impacts, that information has an impact, and we don't know what to do with it. C stands for complexity. We are all in the same world. Networks are working. Before, we used to apply these networks just talking about the weather. Yes, when we say that a butterfly can generate a typhoon in the Caribbean, but today in the world of education and in the scientific world, that is true as well. So if there is a problem in China, in the economy, this is going to be having an impact in an industry in Mexico. And also, something important is that for us it is difficult to understand or to recognize patterns within the complexity of the world. So what are we supposed to do with our students? They are going to be working with new tools. They are going to be thinking with concepts that have not been invented yet, and they are going to be facing problems, and we don't know which their problems are. So what is our task for us teachers, and who is going to be making the decisions about what we're going to be teaching? It is not up to politicians. It is not up to parents. They don't know. Priests only know about their churches. Scientists know about their science, but they don't know about other sciences. So we, experts in education, it is up to us to become the caregivers for our students in terms of the future. In the past, at school, the only thing that was happening was that we were transferring knowledge. Society said, you should be transferring those skills or that long knowledge. We were just transmitting knowledge, but now society doesn't know what we need to be conveying, what we need to be transferring, because society is evolving all the time. So we need to be able to think in advance if we do not want to leave our students unprotected, without protection in this world, which is going to become a global world, a world full of opportunities, but a world which is going to be very hard and ferocious. It's going to be very hard on those who don't take advantage of those opportunities. And I think that in the Basque Country you are doing things very well. But Arevalo was saying, this cannot be just improvised. This is not improvisation. We need to work. And it is true that here in the Basque Country you realize that you needed to turn or to become a society of knowledge. Yesterday I was talking to Professor Tknika, who was one of the regional ministers for education in the Basque Country. And I think that here in the Basque Country you were able to see that if in a society we are not able to generate a learning ecosystem, that society is going to be marginalized against. It is true that you have been very successful, yes, and something that shows that success is the unemployment rate. Unemployment rate among young people is the lowest unemployment rate in Spain, and you should be proud of that. So, how can we work around education? Which should be the approach? And I am going to be telling you about what we are doing within our group in the Nebrija University. Executive Intelligence and Education, that is what I am going to be telling you about right now. There is a term I enjoy very much, which is the term talent. We need to develop talent. Our students talent. Talent is a fashionable term. In 1992, McKinsey consultants published an article when they said the war for talent has started. All the companies need talent, they want to manage talent, but The Economist said a few years later, they said, we are all speaking about talent, but what talent is? It is not a scientific concept, but it is a concept we all need to know how to handle. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you about a pupil, a student of mine, who is 14 years old in secondary education, and whenever he has an 150 IQ level. He is very smart, very intelligent. He is a very hardworking person, a perfect student. But at a certain point, he reaches the conclusion that he's smarter than his teachers and smarter and more intelligent than the other students. And maybe that was true. He was a little bit bossy. He enjoyed having money, and he turned into the leader of a band in his group in his neighborhood. He started, things a little bit crooked, and right now that kid is in prison. He's 25 years old because he was trafficking with drugs. So here comes the question. Was this guy intelligent or was he stupid? Well, he was intelligent because all the objective intelligence tests seemed to say that. But he was very silly because of how he used that intelligence. So we need two terms. One of them is the word that defines the structure of the capabilities a person has, and another term which indicates how a person is using those skills or those capabilities. And sometimes I use a metaphor and I say, well, listen, human intelligence is very similar to playing poker. Both in life as well as when we are playing, we are given certain cards. We have a genetic load, the economic situation, we are born within a specific culture or country, and then when you are playing cards, you are given cards. So both in life as well as when we play, we receive good cards and bad cards. Of course, it is much better to be given good cards. But now comes the question. The person who has the best cards is going to be always the winner? No. What counts is knowing how to play. So that is the answer. It is true that there are things we cannot change. I am going to try and teach you so that you can know how to play well with what you have, with your cards. And if we are talking about children who have no health problems, that capability, that skill is essential. The fact of knowing how to play, how to use our skills. And now we know that our skills or that ability is much higher than what we thought. Things that in the past we used to say, you either have that skill or not, you either have it or not, such as creativity, memory, our skill to learn. We used to think that that could not be improved, but now we know that we were wrong. Creativity too, that can also be learned and improved. And we know that what we are doing when we are educating our children, we are making it possible for them to enlarge their intelligence structures. Those structures, yes, that is even anatomically true. Talent doesn't come from the beginning. Talent appears at the end, after we have been trained. Through education, we're going to be generating talent. And we all know that the biggest wealth we have in nations are not agricultural production or raw materials or financial capital. No, the biggest wealth is talent. We're sure about that, and that is why now the education system implies an essential provider, an essential wealth provider, also in economic terms. And that is why right now all the nations are in a state of emergency. in terms of culture. They all know that they have to do something, because if not, they are going to miss the train. In the year 2000, between the year 2004 and 2008, there have been 400 education reforms, most of which have been useless, because they couldn't produce effects. So we are running against, this is a race, and the European Commission, they say by the year 2030 we need to create almost 40 million high-skilled jobs. Before, we were also speaking about that, and we are not going to be able to make it. And there is going to be a mismatch. We are going to end up having to import high-skilled people, because that is what they are doing right now in India or in China, importing those highly skilled people. So, from the point of view of education, what do we have to do? We need to go and say to society, listen, we know how to make it, and if we don't know, we are going to learn. And we are going to make attempts, we are going to study and see how to solve this problem. Because it is true that it is a social justice and an economic problem. We cannot neglect our students. We need to do something for them. And how are we going to generate talent? What I said before, is it true what I said when I was speaking about talent, or was I just sending a rhetoric message? Yes, it is true. We can generate talent. Well, we all know about neurology. Neurology is very optimistic, because whenever there is a discovery, they say that our capacity to learn is much bigger compared to what we thought. But now there is another science which until this moment was somehow pessimistic, which is genetics. At the end of the 20th century, we were able to decodify the human genome. We know how it works. We know how to use it. We have been very successful in genetic terms. We can transfer genes from one species to the other. The evolution has been huge, but it is true that at the same time there was pessimism. As if the dice had been thrown, and if you had been lucky, good for you. But today we are talking about epigenetics, and not only about genetics. And epigenetics say that each of us are born, and each of us, we have a specific genome inherited from our parents, but not all the genes are activated. Some of them get expressed, but not all of them. And the fact of expressing themselves depends upon the environment. And in this sense, education is included. So today we have a possibility ahead of us, and it is true that it is quite scary. So does it mean that through the learning process, does this mean that we are able to change the expression of certain genes? Yes, that's right. And if we don't give our children that education, they won't be able to activate the expression of those genes? Maybe not. So what I was telling you about the comparison between intelligence and poker, well, now I have to change the ending of the story, because now I say, yes, of course, we're going to be teaching you to know how to play with what you have. But if you play well enough, then you will be able to change the cards you were given. So maybe this seems to be a contradiction, right? But the brain and genetics mystery, that is how they work. If our young people, if our adults too, if we are given the right training, we can activate the skills that we would have never been able to develop. So it is true. And this is not something rhetorical. Yes, in fact, it is true. We can promote and expand talent, and we need to do that. And we need to be able to know how to do it. But we need to speak about intelligence in other terms. We need a new idea. And that is what I am going to try and explain right now to all of you. Well, I have given my presentation, and you can take a look at it. later on to get more details. But let me tell you about education and to tell you a story. In the month of June, in the city of Bilbao, there was a very important congress, the International Conference on Thinking. And at that point, in Bilbao, we were still talking about multiple intelligence, about that method, but what we are working with is even much more powerful. Yes, because it makes it possible for us to solve problems concerning what do we need to be conveying, which are the skills that we need to have and that we need to transfer in this world where ideas are going to be replaced by others. What type of personality should our students have to be successful? In the world of work, we have seen certain clues. Certain multinational companies such as Manpower, who are there trying to study and to know how training should be, now they have replaced the term employability by learnability, the capacity or the capability to learn. Are you able to learn or not? That is the most important thing. And if you are able to learn, then you will get a job. But if you are not willing to learn, or if you are unable to learn, then it is clear that you won't be successful. Clinton's Secretary of State also spoke about it, and he said the new poor people are those who are not willing or who are not in a position to learn. That is why we have a very clear social added responsibility, because we are also going to be a driving force in terms of economic distribution, economic creation, but to do so we need to get and to be much, much better compared to how we are right now. And we are going to be suffering a lot of pressure, and we will have to accept it, just as you are doing that. Being optimistic, but knowing that we are going to be making mistakes, but knowing that we will learn from those mistakes, and also knowing that, that we have to make it possible for the country to trust us. If we are in a country and we don't trust the education system, then that will be a very bad starting point. But we have to be convincing. We have to say to everybody, don't worry, we know what we are doing. Things are complex, but please trust us. We know what we are doing because we all have learned something, all of us teachers. I remember that there was a professor in the US in the pedagogic school. He was training students, and on the very first day of university, he said, listen, all this summer I have been teaching my dog how to talk. The dog is right there if you want to see my dog and to see how the dog talks. The dog came in, 5 minutes, the dog isn't saying a word, the word is not saying anything. 5 minutes later, and suddenly a student says, excuse me, professor, your dog cannot talk. And the professor says, oh, that's a very good remark. And that is very useful too for your job. Please remember that I said that I had taught my dog how to talk, but I didn't say that the dog had learned and that now the dog could talk. That is our task, but our task, we want our students to learn. That is, at the end of the day, what we should be achieving. The problem is that in the different state or national education systems, those systems should be guaranteeing the education system. That doesn't mean that they are going to be doing that by themselves. They are going to be working through private or through public institutions, but the state, the nation has to guarantee quality and universality in education. But right now, at this moment, what we also see is, or we should be able to know how to make it, how to turn these systems into learning systems, into successful learning systems through which our students are getting those skills. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about executive intelligence. And I think that this image is very important. If you come out of this building with this image in mind, I think it will be very useful for you. Human intelligence has two layers. First, well, when we talk about animals, even if they are very intelligent, they only have one layer. We have a brain which gets information, elaborates information, assesses things, stores things, and then the brain produces a response, a movement. Let's imagine, do animals think? Yeah, sure, of course animals think, but in a different way. Let's imagine that you go to the mountain and there is an eagle, and the eagle spots a rabbit. And then at that point, the eagle goes towards the rabbit. And then at that point, the eagle's brain has to start doing calculations, and not even the most powerful machine would be able to calculate all that. The eagle has to take into account the height, the feathers it's going to be moving, the angle required to be able to get closer from the rabbit, how to modulate the movement. All those are calculations. And when we ask a computer to do all that, we need to use very, very complex equations. And then at what point? Because if the angle is not the right one, then there will be an accident. The eagle will be suffering an accident. So our brain is all the time establishing those calculations and using information. But we don't know how we handle and how we manage that information. For example, a little tiny problem. Have you visited the planet Mars? No? None of you? Well, did you have any problems to answer this question? No, I don't think so. You replied quite quickly. 200 milliseconds. That's the time it takes. Here comes now the most important question. How come did you know that you had never visited Mars? You are going to say, well, I couldn't picture. No, you haven't done anything at all. You have asked your brain, and your brain has replied. And we don't know how we did it. So what happens? We have a huge machine that we share with animals, but we have a second layer, as I said before. And this second layer makes it possible for us to manage this whole big machine.
We don't know how we do it, but we can decide tomorrow at 10:05 tomorrow morning that we're going to start learning Chinese. For example, on the lower floor, all animals have something that we teachers are worried about, which is the willingness to do something or motivation. What happens if we don't have motivation, if the upper floor that takes decisions doesn't work properly, isn't working properly, then you're at the mercy of the downstairs floor, which is the one that deals with motivation. We've actually thought that if we didn't want to do something, we couldn't do it, and that's a problem, because we all do lots of things even though we don't want to do them. Why? Because the will to do something comes upwards. Oh, this should work. It's not working. It comes from the ground floor, whereas decisions come from the upper floor downwards. And if we don't train our executive functional system well, you find children and teenagers who aren't able to manage their huge ability to pay attention, to learn, and to manage their emotions. And so they're at the mercy of a machine that they can't control. The education of executive functions is going to be the major educational leap that we're going to possibly take. For example, all animals have attention mechanisms, automatic attention mechanisms. You'll have seen a gazelle hear a noise, flick up its ear, because they've got to analyze that noise. They do it automatically. We also have that ability as humans. But not only that, not only do we react to stimuli that provoke our attention, but we can concentrate on something that we're interested in. And this attention is something that comes from the upper floor. When a child has an attention deficit, what we actually say is that they haven't developed well their executive functions, and they're at the mercy of what's coming from the downstairs upwards. And at that time, therefore, it's priority to know that if we want to develop the intelligence of these children and also their ability to learn and their ability to control their emotions, we need to insist from the time they are very small children that they develop. And of course, the bottom part as well, that's to do with memory. That's where skills are laid down. That's where habits are learnt. That's where agreements are simplified. But obviously, if we don't have a good manager of all of this, all of those tools that are in the lower floor will work willy-nilly and won't be very coordinated. So if we want to develop talent in our children, we need to help them train the lower floor, which is their memory, and also train the upper level, the upper floor, which are the executive functions, which when they've been isolated are the following. They're up there on the screen. The first is activation. A brain, if it's going to learn, needs to be active. It needs to be alert. I was about to bring you some images, some fantastic images, the functional images taken by a magnetic resonance machine about how the brain works. They've been published by MIT and more precisely by Dr. Rosalie Rocker. And these images show that the activity of a brain of a child when they're listening at a home is actually lower than the activity of the brain when he's asleep. No, it's not funny. I mean, it's not funny. That's the way it is. That is completely true, and it's spectacular. It's a spectacular image. So if we don't manage to awaken the brains of our children, they're never going to learn anything. That's why all teachers know that during the first 5 minutes of their class, what they have to try to do is to wake their children up. Not actually wake the children up, but wake their brains up, because their brains may be in a completely passive state. The ability to wake a person's brain up is the first executive function. It's what is done artificially if you take amphetamines. Well, obviously we're not going to be taking amphetamines because they have other side effects, but let's look now at the difference between an active brain when learning and a passive brain when learning is so radical. The difference is so enormous that it determines the academic future of that student. Secondly, second executive function, impulse inhibition. An impulsive child doesn't concentrate his attention and has difficulties learning. The same happens to an impulsive adult, who's a person who moves from a desire to an action without putting the brakes on from the upper level. We need to put the brakes on impulses to see whether they're good, to see whether we can take a decision, and to see whether we should carry on directing our action. What we're trying to see is whether we can actually manage the huge machinery, this heavy machinery that is our brain. There's a test that we do with children that are age 5. And it's a great fun test. And you can see it on YouTube. Have a look at it. It's fun. It's called the sweet test. There's a person with a child, and he gives that child a cake. And he says to him, well, that cake's yours, so you can eat it if you want to. However, if you don't eat it whilst I'm outside the room, when I come back into the room, you'll be able to eat it, and I'll give you another one. So you leave the room, and you record what the child does, the 5-year-old child. There are some children who stuff the cake and they don't even take the wrapping off it. And there are some children who don't want to eat the cake because they're thinking of the prize. But there are some children who have this sort of confused way of going about things, which is that they sit in front of the cake, they stare at it, they pick it up, they look underneath it, they take a little crumb, and the moment they've taken, eaten one crumb, 15 seconds later they've eaten the whole cake. And there are other children who take another atypical strategy, and the most frequent, which is very moving to see it, is that they cover their eyes. They put their hands over their eyes, and they sit there, and they put up with it. Or they start running around the room, and they don't realise that if they sit there, they realise that if they sit there and think of the cake's stronger than they are. But if they are distracted, then they won't be attracted to the cake. So they try to distract themselves. But what's important with all of this is that the psychologist who invented this test, called Walter Bizet, and in fact one of his books has just been translated in Spanish, and it's called The Sweet Test, or El Test de las Golosinas. You can read it, it's very interesting. This gentleman, together with a group of researchers in New Zealand, have followed children that have taken this test for 30 years, and they've seen that the result of this test, which is technically called the test for delaying rewards, the delaying rewards test, they've been able to predict the academic performance of that child, how it's going to be at work, how it's going to be personally, far better than an IQ test. So, if we want to find out about the future of a child, if you know the result of this test, or if you can try to get this test to the children who take this test have a good result, then we are helping their future. And this is an executive function, it's impulse inhibition. Now then, attention. Why are there so many problems with attention? The most recent conferences that I've attended said that between 10 and 12% of the child population in this country have an attention deficit. What's happening? Why? Of course, there's a small neurological disorder of attention deficit, but it's only in 1 to 2% of the population. And the rest of this is that we're not helping them develop their executive functions. So they get all these symptoms. What about emotional control, the next on the list? Emotions come from the lower floor of the brain. We don't know why we love one person and not another person. We don't know why we are frightened, but we do know that from the upper level, not only can we control our response, but also we can organize the patterns where emotions stem from in a better way. There are some children that are very vulnerable, and it's terrible to see them because sometimes it would seem that they are so vulnerable they can detect any danger that surrounds them. And if we don't adapt the part of their lower level of their brain so that they're more tolerant of difficulties, they're able to put up with difficulties, then they're going to be very ill prepared for the rest of their lives. So we need to know how we can deal with that structure so that the occurrences that go to the upper level are more productive. They help the child be happier. They help them stop worrying so much. I'm going to go over the others very quickly. Then we have, next is planning and organising targets. What we know about the upper level is that it's able to choose targets and then manage all the abilities, the brain's ability to learn and learn skills to achieve those aims. And this is something that is exclusive to human intelligence. We are the only species able to train. What is training? What do I mean when I say training? Training is I choose a target And I ask myself, how am I going to get to that target or that objective? How am I going to meet that objective? And I can develop the necessary skills to achieve that target. That's what training is. And our educational task is to get children to do that. We're trainers, we're maths trainers, language trainers, mechanics trainers, we're administrative trainers or coaches, we're lab trainers. This is what we do. We're trainers, we're coaches. And what we're trying to do is to get our children to acquire the necessary habits to achieve their targets, to achieve their aims. And we also need to help them choose those aims. The fact that we attach so much importance to the final 2 years of secondary education, especially when we talk about the field of careers guidance, is because we need to help our children realize that they have to choose their future career. And you've probably known through experience how difficult that is for children to do that, because our girls and boys don't know what they like nor what they aspire to. And one of our tasks is to offer them sufficient educational experiences, sufficient possibilities to see whether, if they're lucky, they can discover or uncover something that provides them with sufficient energy to take all the necessary learning steps to achieve that. And on many occasions, they don't actually know what they want, and they have tremendous difficulties in understanding that what they like actually may be of value. I'm trying to get people, I'm trying to get included in the Declaration of Children's Rights of a right which I feel is fundamental, which is that all children have the right to experience deserved success at least on one occasion whilst they're at school. And what happens if the child's very clumsy? Well, that's not our problem. Teachers should be sufficiently wise to be able to organize a child's target or objective so that that child can say, I did it, I got there. Because that's like something that's also interesting for adults. There's nothing worse than feeling that you're incapable, impotent. But children at school on many occasions spend all their time in education without ever having felt that they've achieved something, the emotion of achieving something, the emotion of being able to say, I was able to do it. And this is something that should be one of our main objectives when we teach. And children are telling us this. All children in all cultures between the ages of 3 and 4 say the same thing. And if they all say it, then it must be something that's responding to one of their basic needs, which is, Mum, look what I'm doing. Mum, look what I'm doing. What are they asking us when they say that? What they're asking us is that we look at them, that we look at the fact that they're progressing, and that we say to them, oh, you've done that really well. And this is something that should be present in schools as well. This is one of the main driving forces of school motivation, that children, adults, know that they're progressing, and they need to know that. They need to realize that they're progressing. Planning is something that actually drives the whole of the educational effort, and we cannot work unless we know what we're working for, specific targets. Finland, that changed the whole of its education system because it wasn't happy with the PISA results that it was getting, so they changed the whole of the educational system, is now starting a new change and is going to base all its education on projects. It's going to be project-based education. If we educate based on projects, then we set a target, and we don't say you have to learn all of this. We say you've got to develop a project, and to get to the objective of that project, you're going to have to develop the necessary skills. So that's what it's all about. This is very powerful. In a school in New York, in a very humble, poor neighborhood, a teacher talks to a little girl in the front row of class. a coloured girl, and he says to him, how many feet does an arthropod have? And the poor little girl says to the teacher, oh, isn't it a shame, teacher? You seem to be very worried. I wish I was as worried as you were about the number of feet that an arthropod has. Yeah, sometimes it would seem that what we try to get children to be enthusiastic about are the number of feet on an arthropod, and children don't understand what that's all about. But I was talking earlier about learning and training. And when I talk about training, I have to say that it actually shows us why during the learning process we are literally anatomically actually broadening our intelligence, increasing our intelligence. When we carry out a complicated task, for example, when we learn how to drive, initially all the movements that we make, we have to really pay attention to them, and we use executive attention, and it's very tiring. The same goes for air controllers, air traffic controllers. They have to have breaks every so often because they need so much attention that they tire immediately. And that happens to all of us. If you want to pay attention, it's very exhausting. That's why when we're learning to drive, it seems that we haven't got enough hands or feet, and we're trying to look in the rearview mirror, and we're trying to put our foot on the clutch and brake and change gear, etc. But as we learn, the majority of these operations become automatic, and that means that we no longer are making such an effort. It's not using so much energy. We can actually pay attention to other things. And you know that when you're learning to drive. You see that with very, very complex operations. When we're learning, for example, a foreign language, initially we have to remember how to build a sentence, how to make a verb meet. The English, who are complete sadists in all of this, they invented phrasal verbs. They invented phrasal verbs so that we all started thinking that we were very stupid, and secondly, so that we had to pay a lot of attention on what damn preposition goes with which stupid verb. But in the end, even that can be automated, and we can do it without having to pay attention continually. So what you start out doing on the upper level of the brain goes down to the lower level of the brain and becomes an automatic process that doesn't require any energy. That's why there comes a time that you can actually invent a funny sentence in English. That is, once you've got automatic habits, once you've automated your habits, you can start thinking what you can do with different elements of a sentence. And these elements on the lower level can be very sophisticated. Yesterday I was speaking to Professor Tknika about why mathematical talent in part is automatic. Well, why is it that a great mathematician, because he's automated so many complex operations that he can do them without wasting attention, without exhausting himself, without even realizing what he's doing, because he's trained his mathematical brain. This is fantastic when you think about it. A creator, for a creator, creating means acquiring innovation habits, habits to avoid routines. A fantastic writer has acquired the habit of good style. A great scientist has acquired the habit of not taking normal routes, of trying different routes. And we can do that with our students. The methods that we have to develop creativity have been implemented in our programs of the Parents University at all ages, and we know that that's what happens. We can build fertile networks of interconnections in children. We've got tremendous capacity to learn, our brain has. And I think that's the route we're going to take. So in education, we're going to say to children, listen, we're going to teach you a series of things, but we're going to teach you at certain kinds of skills, the upper floor skills, that are going to allow you to carry on learning for the rest of your life, to carry on choosing your objectives, to carry on getting all your energy mobilized. Metacognition is very important. Metacognition is a bit of a strange word, but we are now including it in even nursery school programs. It's a bit of a yucky word, but it's funny to actually sometimes hear 5-year-olds say, we're doing metacognition exercises today. It's kind of funny to hear them say that. And why have we done that? Because metacognition means thinking about how you're doing something. That's what metacognition means. You cannot imagine to what extent this operation, which is very simple, actually speeds up a child's learning ability incredibly. Because what we say to the child is, how did you do this? But if you don't get it right, you can ask the child, why didn't you get the problem right? Let's see what you did. Let's see if you can do it a different way. And this is educational a pattern which is very powerful. We're going to take a further step. Talent isn't something that just belongs to people, but also to society, to associations, groups. And I think it even belongs to nations, to large societies. I think societies can develop shared talent. Every time 2 or 3 intelligences come together, emerging phenomena come to the fore, which we cannot even foresee. After spending a lot of time studying individual intelligence, I realized actually that that's an abstraction. It doesn't exist. Of course, we have our own intelligence, but this intelligence has always developed in an environment which either encourages it or prohibits it. So we need to be in intelligent environments. I say this because there's 2 cases that I was very much interested in. One was the intelligence of couples. Why is it the 2 very intelligent individuals can come together and form a very stupid couple? I was worried about that. I'm not joking, because it is a big problem that in our personal lives, the 20th century has left us and affects not just our happiness, but also our education. And it's a mystery. What does happen there? That's firstly. Secondly, why are there intelligent schools and unintelligent schools? Why? All those people that are in a school are intelligent, but what happens when they get into contact with each other? I'm not going to talk here about policy or politics. I'm not referring to that, because there are very intelligent people, but when they start talking about politics and policy, say a whole load of stupidities. But I'm not talking about that. But we're talking here about schools. Schools. An intelligent school is a school in which a group of people who perhaps are not that extraordinary and that outstanding, but because they're working in a specific way, produce outstanding results. That's the intelligence of that school, because it's not the intelligence of the people. In the past, earlier Jorge mentioned that. It's not the aggregate intelligence of the people. No, it's the fact that because they work in a specific way, they produce ascending, emerging effects, whereas in the case of frustrated couples, they're descending effects. So we need to look after the intelligence of schools, of learning ecosystems, of couples, of people. And this is all one of the ways that we have of improving the education of our children. So with all of that, we have something else that comes into play, which afterwards Enrique Dans will be talking about. He's the one that knows about that. I'm not going to talk about it today. But it is true that our children are going to have to face a reality that is changing at the speed of light, which is the advances that in the workplace we've seen with artificial intelligence. It's said that 60% of high-level professions, even those that we are developing today, are going to be replaced by robots. Not robots that are just going to screw in screws. No, robots that can write articles for Forbes magazine. These are very, very sophisticated robots with sophisticated programs, which in the past could only be done by human beings. The STAR program of artificial intelligence at the moment is a program called Watson, and there's a group in the US who wants this program called Watson to be presented as a candidate to the presidency of the US. Stop laughing, it's not that funny. Because it's a program that can take great decisions, because the problem is that the capacity of artificial intelligence isn't just to handle information or manage information, but also to take decisions. So that AI can have executive functions, not just lower level functions. So that makes us ask, well, how does all of this fit in? And I think this helps us understand where we go. In the 5 minutes that I've got left, I'm going to talk about the program that we're working on, which is an educational program that we're working. We call it Centauro project, Centaurus project. And we would like to collaborate with you to try to put it in practice, because it's still a pilot project at the moment. Why have we called it the Centaurus project? Well, a few years ago, there was an event that we were all moved by, which is that a computer program, Deep Blue, managed to beat Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion. Until then, we always thought that chess was the height of human rationality, and that if a machine could beat us, then we would just be second division, because machines would be more intelligent than us. So when Kasparov was asked why, he said, well, the next century's chess players will be a Centaurus chess player. That's why we chose that name. Because it's going to be a human intelligence that is going to be able to manage very complicated computer systems, but they're going to have to learn to manage them and work with them and collaborate with them, not just to be skilled, but also to be able to make use of the tremendous possibilities that these computer systems are going to offer. And that's why we're trying to get computers inside the classroom, so that they are there for every single problem, and so that we know what needs to be kept in a pupil's memory, a pupil's brain, and what can be kept in the computer's memory. So it's ridiculous to say, why should I learn something if I can find it? That's absolutely ridiculous, because I've, spent a lot of time on this ever since I was a young man. I've been concentrating on artificial intelligence. I've got to say to you that if you connect a donkey to the internet, it's still a donkey. So what we want is for the person who's using internet to be very intelligent, so that they know how to understand, so that they know how to use the possibilities that machines have on offer. This person, this tremendously intelligent person, who's going to have the intelligence that we need to develop, which is an intelligent person which has sufficiently powerful executive functions so that they can manage their memory and the computer. And that's what will bring about a certain kind of intelligence. Every time this has happened, the brain has changed. It happened when people learned how to write, learnt music. Nobody could have written a symphony without having a music ability, because it's broadened the way of thinking, broadened our way of creating, and broadened the way the mind operates. That's why we're in another kind of transformation, which is going to be very powerful and very swift. And if we don't get down to work, we're never going to know what to say to our children. So that's the outlook. And it's an outlook from a Labour viewpoint. Has another thing that I need to add, which is that in all countries, an implicit social consensus that had existed has been broken in all countries, and it's harming our students. That's why I want to defend my students and say that we're not treating our students properly, because this implicit covenant with society was that, okay, if you do your side, if you meet your side, which is to get educated, we'll do our side, which is to give you possibilities to make use of that education and allow you to organize your future. Now, there are many of our students who say, I've done my bit. I've done my bit. I've got my education. I've done everything within my power. And now I'm not getting a response. And at the moment, the great creative task that we all have and that we should all make an effort towards is precisely how we can invent what we need more of at the moment, which is new jobs, new ways of working, new ways of saying to our children, who we are partly responsible for, yes, society has also done their bit. And if you do your bit, if you get training, then we will try to give you the possibility of choosing your target and developing your personal project. I have no more time. I've run out of time and I have nothing more to say. Thank you so much. See you soon.